So welcome everybody. This is a follow-on to an event we had in September during UN General Assembly Week and Climate Week in New York. We had a panel discussion looking at, and a few keynote speakers looking at this question of how companies engage with landscape and jurisdictional initiatives. And we're very happy to have this follow-on workshop, which is a bit more of a deep dive into the topic for practitioners. And there's another workshop on the 7th of December. We'll share the details at the end, which we hope many of you can join. And very delighted to be co-hosting this event with colleagues from WWF, ICEAL, ProForest, and the TFA. So this one is on the UNDP Zoom account, and the one in December is going to be on a TFA account. If you want to hit the next slide. This is the shape of where we're going over the next 60 minutes. In a moment, I'll be sharing some high-level thoughts from a report that we published about the beginning of this year called Value Beyond Value Chains, and then opening that up into a conversation with Agus Panermo from GAR, Golden Agri Resources. For those of you that don't know, one of the world's largest producers of palm oil. And then I'll be handing over to Sophie Higman from ProForest, who'll be sharing some of their work looking at question of how companies engage with landscape initiatives. And she'll be introducing Catalina Roman and Ernest Duamena from Cargill and Touton, who will be sharing a couple of case studies of work they're doing at the landscape and jurisdictional level. We hope to have some time for Q&A at the end. And as I said, for those of you just arriving, please use the chat. We have full chat functionality on this call, so you can put in questions, comments, observations, suggestions, and we'll keep an eye on the chat as we go through it, and pull questions out of the chat to discuss as we go. So if you could go to the next slide. So this image is from our report, Value Beyond Value Chains, which is on the TFA Jurisdictional Resources Hub, and downloadable from there as well as our website. And it's basically looking at the different levels when you think about sustainable production, out from farms to landscapes, subnational jurisdiction, national and global level. And the next slide, Aline. Our rather simplistic argument is that over the past 15 to 20 years, a lot of the focus has been on creating global standards. So things like RSPO, for example, or global declarations like the New York Declaration of Forests, or global frameworks like the Accountability Framework. And then focusing on an improving supply chain management. So integrating those standards, approaches into how you manage supply chains through mapping and tracing products through supply chains, implementing certification systems, paying premium for certified products, etc. And then down to the farm level. So tracing down to the farm level, supporting farmer organizations, farmer training, access to finance, etc. But the middle piece of landscape, subnational level and national level in terms of the enabling environment has been a little neglected, partly deliberately, because a lot of companies and NGOs think governments can be rather tricky to deal with. And so this was an attempt to use purely, predominantly market mechanisms to drive change. But what we've seen on the next slide is the situation on the left, where we have sort of islands of good practice. So I'll stick with palm oil, which is what I know best, but you have RSPO certified palm oil, which achieves a good standard environmental and socially. but production as a whole doesn't necessarily shift. So RSPO has about a 20% penetration rate into the palm oil production market. So you've got 20% produced to an RSPO standard, but you got the remaining 80% still produced at a lower standard. And the question is, how do you raise the floor? So how do you raise production standards across the entire market? And our argument is that you need to look at the enabling conditions. So you need to look at how do you both improve the legal and regulatory frameworks, both in terms of what those frameworks are, but also in terms of their enforcement and the enforcement capacity of governments. How do you build capacity across whole sectors and drive transformation across whole regions and create more of a level playing field? If you're a company on the left who has been one of the pioneering companies driving improvement in sustainability standards in one of these key commodity markets, that's obviously not a particularly attractive position to be in, because you're carrying much more cost than your competitors. And long term, it's not a very sustainable business model to maintain. So it's in your interest to think, how can you work with governments and your peers across the sector to help raise standards across the board. Next slide. But of course, this hasn't traditionally been the domain of companies. It's been traditionally the domain of governments. So the question is, if as a company you want to see how to improve the enabling conditions for sustainable production, what exactly is your role in doing that? Next slide. And here's a few of the areas that one could be thinking about at different levels, from landscape to subnational and national levels. Subnational, in the case of Indonesia, would be provincial and district level. And you typically have similar structures in other countries. You've got national, sort of regional, and district level governments. And here on this slide, you've got a few indications of some of the considerations in terms of sort of regional development plans, land use planning, land use monitoring, extension services in the middle column. Over on the right, you've got enabling legal frameworks around land tenure, environmental standards, environmental sort of labor laws, production standards, etc., as well as how budgets, national budgets, are allocated across these issues, which includes agriculture, includes environment, but also can include, you know, ministries of health, infrastructure, finance, climate, etc. So I just want to bring in at this point Agus Panermo, who's Managing Director of Sustainability at Golden Agri Resources, to sort of comment on this slide in terms of, you know, how you see it as a company, as I'm sort of suggesting that companies need to be thinking about how to collaborate with governments across these areas. What's your perspective on that?
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you for giving a very nice framework for our discussion tonight or this morning. GAR, Golden Agri Resources, is the largest palm oil company in terms of plantation size. However, being the largest actually is not that much, because we are only 4% in terms of size of the total palm oil plantation in Indonesia. Because of that, the role of the most that we can contribute is basically moving left and right, or helicoptering, going up to the national level, to the provincial level, and to the district level, and trying to engage as many as possible stakeholders to bring forward the sustainable palm oil idea. At the national level, we have a national platform for sustainable palm oil called FOXB. FOXB is a national platform of Sustainable Palm Oil Forum, where the government is at the coordinating functions, and members are stakeholders across different types of stakeholders, from the NGOs to universities to companies, big companies, small companies, national government, professional government, likewise. So it is a place where everybody can talk and discuss and agree on what need to be done. There is a national plan that put the roadmap for Indonesia as a country to increase the sustainability aspect of our palm oil sector. As a company, GAR is also involved at not only national, but also provincial and district level. We are also supporting the smallholders in their replanting program by giving guarantee to the banks for the loan to replanting their crops. Many of our smallholders, which is about 40% of the total area of palm oil plants in Indonesia, have not good seed, low productivity seeds, and they need to be replaced. They need to be replanted. So we provide some guarantee to the banks on the loan that the smallholders will need to take in order to replant. We also create a link between our consumer goods producer, the big companies in Europe, in US, the traders that buy the products that we sell with the smallholders on the ground. So it's a matchmaking, it's a partnership, it's a private to private collaboration, as well as when we come to jurisdictional approach, it is a public to private partnership. We are involved in several jurisdictional approach initiatives where the district government takes the lead and companies, both palm oil producers and consumer goods companies are collaborating. I think I need to stop here.
So all of that is great and great in theory, and I wonder about what the practice is. I know a lot of our work is great in theory, but often quite challenging in practice. So you know, maybe we just focus on what do you see as some of the key challenges, particularly around this topic of public-private collaboration, and how large companies such as yours can collaborate effectively with governments, you know, whether it's at the national level or the jurisdictional level. What do you feel is kind of working, but what do you feel are the key challenges to address?
The first challenge is to come up with a common perspective about how to move forward, because people have different expectations, different goals, different standards. So we need to bring it down to the level that most stakeholders can participate. You cannot bring someone using Charlie's slide right from the where it was at the bottom to the highest level. It has to go up gradually. So the move to go up need to be agreed. How are we going to increase step by step the sustainable practices of the farmers, farmers on the ground? That's the biggest challenge that I have.
And what's your feeling about the capacity of government and the capacity of companies to collaborate effectively? Because in some ways, this is, you know, new territory. We're asking companies to form coalitions, to work in partnership with governments, to work on issue areas that maybe there hasn't been collaboration in the past. For example, things like land use monitoring or regional local government development plans, and suggesting that there's a place for the private sector to participate in these processes, but recognizing that the private sector may not have that capacity, and also the governments may not have that willingness or openness to collaboration. So what's your experience of how that's working on the ground?
Well, governments, just like companies and NGOs, are actually not a homogeneous entity. There are progressive elements in each of the groups, and we can collaborate with those who are willing to go together and exploring some ways to improve. That's why the jurisdictional approach is very much dependent on whether there are progressive head of the districts that are willing to take extra mile to bring the standard of the district at a higher level, and also to provide solutions. And we have not come to that stage yet, because, for example, a smallholders that only have land of 2 hectares, and it happened to be in the area of high conservation value, then what should he or she do? They cannot abandon their land because that's the only property that he or she has. So we need to come up with creative solution, and those are still the challenges ahead of us. Once we can come up with a solution that makes a lot of people can participate, then we will make a real traction and deliver sustainable products from those districts.
Thank you. I think that's a key point, is sort of moving from like a one size fits all type of approach or a silver bullet type approach to solving the problems, to recognizing the complexity. And that's something that when you're working in this kind of landscape or jurisdictional level, it's easier to work with that complexity and have like a more nuanced approach, at least in theory. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Sophie Higman from ProForest. We're going to go into some case studies in a minute, and then hopefully we can open up for conversation towards the end and bring you back in, Pak Agus. So thank you very much.
Super. Thank you very much, Charlie, and thank you very much, Pak Agus. That was really interesting. I hope that we can come back to some of those issues towards the end. If anyone has any questions, put them into the chat, please. Either, well, for any of the speakers really, but picking up on any of the points that were just made. So I just wanted to introduce some of the guidance that we've been working on at ProForest over the last few years, working with and drawing on our experiences and other organizations' experiences on how supply chain companies can engage with landscape initiative jurisdictional approaches, and what's the sort of processes that they can go through for deciding where to engage, what to do, and how to go about it. So I'll just introduce and really focusing on the first part of our guidance, and then I want to hand over to Catalina Roman from Cargill, and then to Ernest Dramena from Teuton, just to bring it all to life really, and to give us some examples of the work that they're actually doing on the ground in Colombia and in Ghana. So if you give us the next slide, thanks, Celine. Yes, so we've put together some guidance, and we've recently finalized this and kind of tried to describe 9 different elements to the ways that companies can go about engaging with landscape and jurisdictional initiatives. And the first part of that is all about kind of deciding where you as a company might want to engage and what you might want to do, what kind of initiatives to engage with. The second part of it is much more around the how, and we'll leave that, which it'll be kind of covered more in the second webinar that Charlie mentioned, which is in early December. So 4 basic steps that we see, or elements that we see companies going through when trying to decide where and how, you know, what they're going to engage with. If you move on to the next slide, please. So the first one of those is around understanding the supply base, understanding where a company is doing mapping to understand what the major areas, major supply bases are for commodities that they are concerned with, that they're buying. And then identifying the risks around those supply bases. What are the risks that a company's sustainability commitments are not being met, and that they are not complying with their own commitments on, say, deforestation, child labor, respecting human rights, the kinds of commitments that many companies are making. So the first element we talk about is sort of for tracing back the supply base and thinking about where are those major areas that we're supplying from. If you have the next slide, please. And then the second part is thinking about within those major supply bases, what are the priority landscapes and what are the enabling environment around that? So what is the importance of this particular landscape for us as a company, for our procurement? Is it a major source for us? And does that therefore give us a kind of high level of risk? And what is the materiality of that risk? How important are those risks in that particular landscape? And is this an area where we should be engaging in order to address those risks rather than trying to retreat from an area? It's thinking about kind of what's the level of risk, what do we do about it, and does that therefore give us a kind of reason for prioritizing a particular landscape and deciding that we should be operating there and trying to engage with landscape initiatives. And finally, thinking about the leverage and success factors. Do we have people on the ground in that area? Do we have contacts on the ground? Is there a supportive government environment that Pakagos was talking about, that it's so important to have government initiatives that are working there and support at a say a district jurisdictional level to move forward the sustainability agenda across the whole landscape. Next slide, please. And then thinking about within that area, sort of thinking about, okay, well, what are the initiatives that are going on? What are they trying to do? What are the local motivations around those? Are they aligned with the company's motivations and aims? And what are the kind of governance and opportunities for private sector involvement in that? Is there a space for the private sector to get involved here? And is it going to start delivering our sustainability agenda? Is that going to support the delivery of our agenda? And how are the decision-making processes made in those local initiatives? What kind of governance is there around decision-making? And finally, next slide, moving on to kind of, there's a decision point of kind of thinking, okay, which initiatives are we going to support? How are we going to support them? Is it through our supply chain, directly through our suppliers and down to the landscape level, or is it through thinking about a sectoral initiative? Which ones are there and which ones are going to help deliver our sustainability commitments as a company? So that's the sort of process that we think through, the sort of logic that we tend to work through as companies are thinking about how and where they should engage in jurisdictional or landscape initiatives. And I'm going to move on, next slide, and hand over to Catalina Roman, who's going to talk us through how they've addressed this process and gone through this in Colombia in developing a landscape initiative there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sophie. Good day, everyone. Many thanks for inviting us to share our experience in the intervention design phase of our landscape initiative in Colombia. Today, I was asked to explain to you the process we have been through together with ProForest and the Colombia Palm Growers Association in order to decide the focus of the work we want to implement. I just would like to stress since the beginning that we are at early stages of the project and still have a part of this phase to be conducted on the ground. But so far, we have some interesting lessons to be shared today in the process of choosing our landscape and identifying the stakeholders that should be engaged in the initiative. Next, please. I first would like to quickly explain our vision and landscape approaches. Many of the challenges in the palm oil supply chain, such as deforestation and human rights concerns, are not specific to a single mill or to the palm sector alone. These issues often are common within our region and across commodities. Therefore, to drive meaningful change, Cargill thinks that it's key to focus on supplier engagement, not only at the mill level, but also through interventions more broadly at the landscape level, especially in high priority landscapes. Shared action is needed to tackle persistent, complex, and social environmental risks involving multiple mills, growers, buyers, and other stakeholders. We also recognize that engagement of public institutions is critical to enforce systemic change. To address these common issues, Cargill is already joining together in multi-stakeholder industry programs focused on landscape level interventions. For instance, our company is one of the 7 companies participating in a collaboration with local government, NGOs, producers, and smallholders to achieve sustainable land use in the Siak and Palawan districts of Indonesia. Now let's start speaking about the process of our initiative in Colombia. Next, please. For our project, we are following the methodology that ProForest, our implementation partner, has designed to undertake landscape interventions. We are also taking guidance from other experts in the matter and their approaches, such as IDH. As explained before, we are currently taking careful steps to nicely design our intervention and choose the best approach to address the issues in the landscape. To achieve that, we have already been working around 4 months in the first 2 steps of the methodology, mapping stakeholders and initiatives, and understanding the supply base. Nevertheless, it is important to highlight that before reaching to this point, we had already spent quite some time in conversations with Fede Palma sustainability team, brainstorming on the idea of the project, what would be our delimitation of landscape and how we would prioritize it over others. I publicly would like to thank Fede Palma for the knowledge, the learnings, and the dedicated work in this process. Next, please. Many would ask why we are planning to take around half a year in designing the project. Well, the main aim of this is ensuring that we carefully understand the priority issues to address and its root causes, have a full perspective of the reality of the ground, map everything that is going on there, and by these means identify and respond better to the expectations of local stakeholders so that they trust us and see us as allies. If we achieve this, we will have greater possibilities to effectively coordinate efforts in the field and achieve what is expected for the project. Now, I would like to start sharing our methodology to prioritize and identify key landscape stakeholders and possible routes of action. Next, please. Colombia is the fourth palm oil producer in the world. Maybe this is the reason why the origin represents around 10% of Cargill supply chain overall footprint, a percentage that raises to 40 if we exclude Malaysia and Indonesia out of the calculation. Also, the country has a strong sectorial governance led by a growers association that has pushed consistently the producers to move forward in sustainability as an added value for the origin, even by supporting implementation of a zero deforestation agreement for the country and RSPO certification. Last but not least, we feel we have already built a level of leverage in our supply chain that could help us to influence some of the changes required to address the gaps we had already identified in our field evaluations. Next, please. So how did we define the palm landscape to look at? In order to answer to this question, I would like to bring to the table a very interesting definition of landscape that I found thanks to C4. This definition says that a landscape is a place with governance in place, which means a landscape can be a geographical area of any stage of scale, from very small to very large, where exist formal or informal institutions that will consider options for the landscape and set priorities. Answer to this concept, along with Fede Palma, we decided to limit our landscape by prioritizing a river basin, a very symbolic landscape for the sector that could have a close relationship with sustainability management. But then the question was, which river basin? At that point, Proforest created a methodology to choose the priority river basin for our supply chain, combining not only production information, commercial importance, palm oil footprint data, but also factors such as the level of national water indicators, deforestation risk, tendency to community conflicts, among others. So according to these criteria, we prioritized the Lebrija River Basin with around 90,000 hectares of palm planted in its surroundings. Next, please. But a river basin is still a huge landscape to look at in order to drive impact. Therefore, we had to prioritize a sub-river basin, and for that we analyzed the information provided by stakeholders, identified and interviewed during the design phase of our intervention. They showed us with their information the area with the highest presence of conflicts between communities and the sector regarding water issues, where the impact of palm in water streams is most perceived, and with the highest concentration of palm growers. This would be the area called the direct effluence to Magdalena River, the one you can see in the image on the right. Next, please. Now that the landscape was delimited, we had to make efforts to understand what was going on in the field and who was doing something about the issues we had identified. In the investigation process led by Proforest with local stakeholders and secondary information, we found that 33 organizations are already present in the zone, and there's a solid mechanism of dialogue to implement projects connected to the river, the ABC network, where some of the palm mills are already participating at different levels. With that network, we found an option already in place to support and strengthen the topics of our interest that might have possible gaps. They are also willing to let us in and boost their results, which is the most important part. Next, please. Here I am just listing really quickly some of the possible main issues of interest we found during our investigation of the territory that have connection with NDP criteria and could be topics to be prioritized and addressed in the framework of a landscape project through any working vehicle we choose. Next, please. The main conclusion of our work is that good knowledge of the field is key to choose the best approach. This is why we feel we need to go there now that we appear to be able to travel inside the country to consolidate the results of steps 3 and 4 of the intervention design. For instance, we need to understand better the results of the current governance initiative occurring in the landscape and identify possible pathways for strengthening it. Also, we require to oversee better how to address a key topic related to water, which is deforestation, and conduct field visits and interviews to check if we had missed something in our investigation, as well as to explore pathways of collaboration with local stakeholders and the local government. I think that's it. Thanks a lot again for this opportunity, and let's welcome Ernest from Tuton to share his experience in Ghana.
Thank you, Catalina. Thanks for the opportunity. So just to add to the lessons from Catalina, please can we go to the next slide. So this is a landscape that Tuton invested in for the past 3-4 years. And in choosing the landscape, considering Tuton being a commodity trading company and also a processor, we provide services for chocolate companies all over the world. And in choosing between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, which are the 2 leading cocoa producing countries, we finally settled on Ghana for 1 or 2 reasons. The first one being the fact that at the time, we realized the government of Ghana had a lot of interest in addressing deforestation issues. So the likelihood of getting the support of government in addressing deforestation was really keen. Secondly, we also considered within our supply chain, where do we have the highs of our supply base, where do we have enough strength, and that also ticked Ghana for a particular landscape that we are looking at. Then the third one we look at is the extent to which we are exposed to risk and also exposing our our customers to risk. So out of the many landscapes in which we operate in Ghana, we collaborated with the government of Ghana, in this case, Forestry Commission and Cocoa Board, who had already started some discussion on addressing deforestation issues to really settle on one landscape out of the many hotspot intervention areas that have been defined by the government. So on the screen on the map, you see the emission reduction program area with a number of hotspot intervention areas. On the left corner, the last corner landscape is where we made our investment. And this landscape has a total area of 250,000 hectares approximately, with about 150,000 being cocoa. And in that, there are a lot of people who are mainly smallholder farmers, and those also who are into other commodities, a little bit in oil palm, gold mining, but majority of that is in cocoa. A key problem of this landscape is that productivity is very low. Secondly, deforestation is high in that landscape. So in trying to address deforestation, we needed to look beyond our supply chain, which is just a small portion of the entire supply base. Number of companies who also operate. How do we engage the different NGOs? How do we engage government to be able to address deforestation, because it is pre-competitive when it comes to addressing those issues. Next slide. So in this slide, you realize that I have 3 roles or 3 levels of engagement. The first one, as a company, we realized that it will sometimes you wouldn't get all private companies joining you at the initial start of the project, but at least you have incentives, packages that you can give to farmers who are directly within your supply chain and those outside the supply chain, but within the communities in which we work in. So we designed a package of 7 main services, from training, access to input, finance, farmers and at the community level and the landscape level, where we engaged other NGOs who support us in addressing the deforestation issue. Particular thing that we did is to engage an NGO to organize the consortium of partners on one side, then on the other side, organize the communities or the inhabitants within the landscape into one single entity called the Landscape Management Board. And that Landscape Management Board represents the entire landscape. The chiefs and the traditional authorities were made patrons. So by engaging this single entity, you will engage everybody within the landscape, where we have signed an agreement to ensure that we are conserving the environment. And out of that, we will give out incentives to them, but they also have to commit to the other side of the bargain. Then at the national level, we are engaging with Ghana Cocoa Board, Forestry Commission, and relevant institutions who have formed a joint coordination committee to be able to address deforestation issues in the cocoa and forest sector. And we expect that they will engage here with the different landscape consortium to be able to address deforestation. Next slide, please. To be able to communicate on our performance, so all the description I gave in the previous slide is what you see within the triangle, where we have the different frame coming together and eventually joining hands to co-manage. But at the end of it all, we want to see that for the sustainability issues within the landscape. And we can only do this by providing three main proofs. The first one is, are we able to provide a deforestation-free compliance map periodically to prove that we are addressing deforestation, to show performance? Secondly, are we able to bring out a landscape performance report that looks at all the different sustainability indicators to look at how the landscape is performing? What is the landscape health? And thirdly, do we have a good governance system to make sure that indigents are not we are not taking advantage of them, but they are well represented in their own issues. Next, and throughout this 6 main insights, the next one is that we see a great huge benefits in pooling resources from multiple sectors. So we have here NGOs, government, and also other entities who came on board with their resources to be able to address all the different challenges in the landscape. And I mean, it complemented each other, and to the extent that the initial cost that we envisaged that we would have incurred for the whole landscape, we able to you spend less because you don't invest alone. The second insight that we have from this is that the business case for actually doing landscape, it goes beyond the single cocoa commodity, and that other commodities within the landscape can also qualify, or they can tag along the sustainability initiatives that we have already implemented to also be sold as sustainable as much as possible. And in fact, within 2Ton, we explored other possibilities of sourcing other commodities within the same landscape, and that brings additional benefits. The third insight that we take along, which to me is the key to this whole thing, is the ability to incentivize and disincentivize communities based on performance payments and tied to conservation agreement. Initially, we had a pack of incentives that we gave to farmers. None of these incentives was able to individually drive farmers to address deforestation, stopping them from going into the forest reserve. Individually did not do that, goes into the landscape, but individually also it didn't do it. When we introduced a payment for ecosystem services, where we give to the Landscape Management Board and say that they should protect the forest, eventually what they did is to be able to organize all the illegal farmers within the forest reserve. And as I speak now, we have over 6,000 farms registered as illegal within the forest reserve. And that brings even a new discussion, where out of the sectors, only 12% is actually cocoa. The rest, initially, we're attributing the whole thing to cocoa, but only 12% is cocoa. The rest is actually food crops and other commodities. And it represents a new point for discussion as to how we can address all this. And this brings us to the role of community in addressing problems that affect them the most. The fifth one, also the role of government to address it, because now that the landscape management board being representing the community has identified it, the next step is to draw up a remediation plan, working in close collaboration with the government to be able to address all these issues. But to get the traction moving, we really need a representative or a committee, or in other words, a landscape manager who will work in close collaboration with the landscape management board and the government to be able to address all the different issues. And in doing this, we expect that that landscape manager should be able to ensure that he is designing a framework, a mechanism where all different landscape can actually plug into it. And this mechanism will be very simple, and that no other stakeholder will feel left out. And basically, these are the key lessons that we have learned from the landscape. And we believe that if such lessons are carried along, or we can improve it, we'll be able to replicate it in other landscape as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ernest and Catalina, for those really interesting case studies. A few problems hearing you at times there, Ernest. We're having a bit of a breakup on the line, or maybe it was just me. But I hope we can maybe come back to some of those points that you were making, and some of those key insights that you've just been giving to us. I've been trying to keep up with the chat, which is now really warming up, and have a few questions to pick up on that. We've got, I think, about 15 minutes for some questions and answers for the panel. So thanks very much, everyone who's been putting your questions in there. And I wanted to start, first of all, with a question for Pak Agus. Because there are a couple of questions that have come up, picking up on your point around developing a shared perspective in a landscape, and a few questions around what's the main challenge to reach collaborative approach, to reach a collaboration and a single perspective, and sort of what are the gaps and misalignments around multi-stakeholder collaboration? So what's the, what are the challenges around reaching collaborative perspectives, a single perspective in landscape approaches?
Okay, thank you.
I guess you're clear.
Yes. The challenge is simple because everybody, every stakeholders have their own goal to achieve. So we need to bring them the milestone can be achieved. Who will get it first because it's the first thing to do, and who will have to be a bit patient after a few years where their milestone can be achieved also together. So that's the crucial part. And the biggest challenge in this process is because government, especially the elected officials, are only working for 5 years. So effectively, within 5 years term, they're only working focusedly on the middle 3 years. And this approach, this journey will take longer period of time. So we need to be able to pass on the batons from one head of progressive district to another success challenge. The other challenge that a bit out of our control, everybody's control, is the up and down of the price of the palm oil. That's why the role of the government in creating local demands, like biodiesel, we now have a B30 policy, is critical because Indonesia produces about 48 million tons of palm oil. And if we rely 80% of them to the international market, then the price will be up and down in a very extreme situations like we have experienced before. But having a domestic market that took about 6 million to 9 million tons of palm oil for biodiesel, then it will a bit stabilize the price. And that's what the government is doing. I'm also addressing one of the questions about the viability of the biodiesel. The biodiesel, the sustainable palm oil, is actually a way, a means to stabilize the price and also to ensure the local farmers, the smallholders, that there will still be markets that they can sell their oil to. So that's the mix, maintaining the economic development as well as the political stability.
Thank you. That's a really interesting answer around kind of political stability and price stability, giving the kind of continuance and long-term kind of support to sort of commonly held perspective, I think. And actually, it was something I was going to come on to, perhaps to ask Ernest, actually, and particularly in Ghana. So you talked a bit about government support being essential, and that's a key part of why you engage and how you engage there. Someone asked a question about what happens if government pulls out. Perhaps that's an unlikely thing in Ghana, but to what extent do you feel that strong central government support perhaps is essential for a landscape or a jurisdictional approach to be successful?
Yes. Still using Ghana as a case, this is a situation where all forest reserves belongs to government, okay, and they have the management rights of the forest reserves. Cocoa companies are outside the reserves, but occasionally you see farmers moving into these reserves when there's opportunity for them to make those farms. So should anybody have any rights or power to reduce or to help prevent the deforestation, it means that we need close collaboration with government in addressing the issue. So looking at it, even if there is government change, I see this as something that the government has already committed to, and already actions on ground by the different governmental institutions to see how this can be addressed. Though they may not have the full frame as to how they can address, for example, remediation plans to move those farmers out. But once they have it on paper and also thinking through dialogue to be able to address it, and if all stakeholders outside or within the landscape can join government, then it can bring along the traction for them to act, and we will achieve the desired results.
Great, thank you very much. That's really interesting. And also, I wonder whether to some extent, you have change of government, but also if you have a sort of long-term buy-in from companies and local kind of collaboration going on, that also strengthens and gives more sustainability to an initiative over time. I've got a couple of questions. There were several questions, in fact, for Catalina around Cargill's approach. And I thought one of them that came, well, there's a couple that came up. One is around what kind of systematic mapping and root cause analysis have you done? And a second one I thought would be interesting to hear about is the sort of challenges of stakeholder buy-in and collaboration, particularly in areas where there's high levels of mistrust historically, which may be the case. So one around the sort of root cause analysis and mapping of that, and another one about getting stakeholder buy-in.
Well, the root cause analysis and the systemic mapping was done in the framework of this obstacles of the pandemic, using Zoom and investigation and long distance interviews with local stakeholders. We had an advantage here, which was we had already previously identified some of those key stakeholders who could provide some interesting information for us. Now that we can go to the field, we will confirm this root cause analysis in a workshop that we are planning to do with all key stakeholders for the project. But yeah, I have to confirm that this is already done. And the second topic, I read the question, and I would like to say that we have an advantage in that region. The advantage is that all those stakeholders had already been working together for around 8 years, discussing the topics related to water and what was the role of each one of the sectors and the stakeholders present in the zone. So I think the main challenge here will be basically for us to gain the leverage and the trust of these governance structure already built for us to have a good part in strengthening what they're doing. And I think it's going to be that will be the key part of our challenge there. They already know each other. They have to know us. They have to know our experience, what we want to do, how we want to support the transformation of the sector there.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I wonder whether there's a sort of follow-on question around also trust and collaboration. And I think I'll put it to Ernest about a question that came up on the chat about pre-competitive collaboration in landscapes, and what sort of approaches help to bring that together. And if we have time, I'd be interested, Agos, if you could also comment on that. This is going to be our last question, I think, because we've got a couple of minutes of closing remarks. But Ernest, pre-competitive collaboration.
Yes, from my experience in our project, I would say that to be able to get your competitors onto the board, there should be a clear mechanism for everybody to plug in where it's benefiting everyone, where they don't feel that there is still room for competition. Once that has been cleared out, also answering to another question that came on the board, you can now design a clear modality as to how do you raise financing to get it done, either through donors or even your contribution, because individually, if you want to address deforestation, you cannot do it. It's not your call individually, but if it's collaborative, you can put together and be able to address and achieve the desired result for all.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Agos, do you want to just add any comments on that? I know you're also involved in pre-competitive collaboration. Is that right?
Yes, actually, on sustainability issue, the pre-competitive collaboration is very common. It's not new. It's not exclusive. It has been ongoing. Companies compete each other, but when they talk about sustainability, then it's very easy to get along. We can have lunch meeting together, dinner meeting together, going out together, exchanging experiences, because the challenges are the same. And the sooner we can get everybody adopting the best practices, the better for the commodity itself, the better price, the bigger margin that we can contribute to the shareholder. So pre-competitive collaboration on sustainability issue is the way to go.
I think that's a great final note, actually. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to hand back to Charlie just to give us some final thoughts and some next steps.
Thanks, Sophie. Aline, if you could share the slides. Just want to thank all of our speakers today. I thought, well, first of all, congratulations for sticking so well to timings, which sometimes is a challenge. I hope you enjoyed the call. From my point of view, we wanted to share some of the work we've done in terms of these reports, which are now on your screen, but also very much get the perspective of the companies doing the work on the ground. So I hope that was a good balance. If you want to look at these reports, you can find them on the Jurisdictional Approaches Hub of the TFA, garesourceshub.org. And that's in the chat now as well to click directly on it. The reports are obviously also on our own websites, the UNDP Green Commodities Programme website, the ProForest website. And on the JA Resources Hub, you'll find a bunch of other resources as well, including a report that is going to be used or a couple of reports that are going to be used as a structure for the session next month. You want to click to the next slide. So this is it. The date is in the bottom left-hand corner, 7th of December. It's 2 p.m. Central European time. So hopefully, well, it's the same time as today. So hopefully you can join us again then. It's going to be continuing this deep dive into this topic with, if you look at that, the first report there, it's a kind of 80-page report with a huge amount of detail in terms of how companies can go about engaging in landscape jurisdictional initiatives. So we're going to have the opportunity to dive further into that topic. And also a great report from ICEAL, some guidance on basically how you can monitor and measure progress in jurisdictional initiatives. So that is going to be next month. Hopefully the link to the registration will go in the chat if you haven't already registered. And the next slide. Also to say that UNDP, part of our green commodities community, we are going to be forming some small peer learning groups for practitioners within companies who are working on landscape and jurisdictional initiatives. And this will be an opportunity to get together 4 times a year in a small group, a small peer group, between probably 6 to 8 members per group, and to bring kind of your live issues and challenges that you're working on and with, and get the input of your peers from peer companies and other companies through the value chain, and hopefully will be a great forum for collaboration and working on live issues and challenges and learning from each other. If you want to find out more about that, then please drop me an email and we can let you know. And the next slide. And also want to let you know about the Green Commodities Community. This online community is recently launched to back up the regular series of workshops and webinars we've been running over the past couple of years in our annual conference. The address is in the bottom left-hand corner, greencommodities.community. And when you go to that page, also in the chat, you will see you can apply to join, and there is a link up there. One thing to flag is a lot of the mail, automated mail from this community currently seems to be going into junk mail folders. So if you register and don't see a registration link coming back, you might need to check your junk mail folder. And the next, is that we at the end now? There is a private sector group within that that I'm co-facilitating, and will be posting notices of further events within that community. Is that the last slide? So dead on 2 o'clock here in the UK, or on the hour, wherever you are. I just want to say a huge thanks to all of you that attended. Thank you for all the great questions in the chat. As mentioned, we've got the follow-on webinar next month. We can pick up some of those questions and carry on the conversation, and then in various forums going forward after that. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are. If the panelists want to stay on the line, we could just have a quick farewell and debrief when everybody else has dropped off.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks very much, panelists and everyone.